the findings are that this prosecution should not have been brought by a competent and professional prosecutor, because the very beginning allegation, which is that money was lost from the Botswana central bank and siphoned out, that from the very beginning of that allegation, an allegation that amounts to 55% of the GDP of Botswana, that has been found not to be true. And then the trail of the money that is accounted for in the affidavit, as it goes through different countries and different people's accounts, and ultimately is allegedly ends up in these blue fly and fireflies accounts in South Africa. That too, at each stage, is not true. The accounts either don't exist, or if they do exist, they didn't exist at the time they're alleged to exist. And many of the accounts have also been based on what appears to have been wrongly obtained accounts. So the accounts now do exist, but the people who hold those accounts have never seen nor know anything about such large sums of money. So in a nutshell, from beginning to end, this was a prosecution which has no basis in reality.
And I suppose the most important thing now is, with your experience in international law and business circles and intelligence, what sort of prosecutable offenses can Ian Khama and Bridgette Motsepe sue for, respectively?
Well, in relation to, well, I think the first thing that needs to happen is that the prosecutor hopefully will welcome our report, because clearly they haven't had the resources or possibly the inclination to investigate, but now this investigation has been done. Once they look at that, I would hope they do the right thing and drop the charges. In relation then to what happens next, I'll defer to what both Ambassador Motsepe and President Khama said at the press conference, which is they are going with their local lawyers in Botswana and in South Africa to take the relevant civil claims for the damage that this has caused to their reputations.
Does that mean Omnia or yourself will not be representing either one of them?
Well, as a technical matter, I'm not a lawyer admitted to practice in either South Africa or Botswana, so that would be rather difficult. And secondly, if they do rely on the report, it may well be that the author of the report, which may be me or maybe Gordon Rainey, would have to be called to give evidence about the contents of the report. So obviously we couldn't represent them. And as an international law firm, we don't practice national law. This is a national law issue.
And so with your international law experience, has there been, and as you were doing your investigations as well, did you find that any of the countries in question have suffered any reputational damage coming out of this?
Well, sadly, I think the country most damaged by this is Botswana itself. And I mentioned in my opening remarks the EU, for the first time ever, putting Botswana on a list of countries that cannot be reliably trusted in relation to money laundering and terrorist financing. I mean, that's a tragedy for a country that has consistently over the years been regarded as a model in Africa for its commitment to democracy and the rule of law. And as I also said in my remarks, and indeed in the report itself, just in 2019, the World Justice Forum they do their report every year, and they ranked Botswana second only to Rwanda in Africa for its rule of law. I fear that next year that may not be the same.
In South Africa?
And as for South Africa, I'm not sure this was intended, but the consequence would be to cast dispersion. I mean, as you know, through this trail, at some point, the money is alleged to come into South Africa by an international transfer. And for that amount of money to come into South Africa by an international transfer, the central bank has to give its permission for the local banks to take that money. And South Africa, no, and the South African Central Bank has said quite clearly it has not.
Yes,
and if it had done, it would, of course, because if the Botswanans are to be believed, and this is money obtained by fraud, money laundering, and financing of terrorism, then it's absolutely the Central Bank of South Africa's obligation not to allow this money to come into South Africa. Now, the money never came into South Africa, so the South Africa Central Bank didn't have to address this question, but to suggest, as this prosecution does, that in fact the money has come in, and therefore by implication the South African Central Bank must have allowed it to come in, does cast aspersions on the Central Bank of South Africa and its processes to ensure that it is not inadvertently pulled in to money laundering and financing of terrorism. The fact is it wasn't, but the implications from the evidence in the affidavit were that it was. But that is wrong, and there's no question that South Africa has done that, nor that the 7 individual banks in South Africa have done anything wrong either. But if the affidavit was true, then they would have done something wrong. And I think that is obviously, for those who still choose to believe the affidavit, after the overwhelming evidence that even, frankly, a first-year newly qualified lawyer might have thought there was something wrong with this evidence. I think if some people still choose to believe this affidavit, then they will, by implication, also believe that South Africa Central Bank and the South African banks were engaged in some way in conduct they shouldn't have been.
But did you find that any bodies or organizations of significance actually believed the allegations, even though they're not true, as you were doing your investigations?
Well, when we did the investigations, of course, since the money never left Botswana, there was never any transaction to believe or not believe. I mean, that's the irony of it all. I think, as we said in the press conference, there have been press reports in Botswana that the Botswana Central Bank has said this money never existed in Botswana and never left Botswana because it wasn't there in the first place. I mean, the sums are so outrageously large that's sufficient. And of course, the EU, hearing these allegations, has quite rightly put this black mark against Botswana. Because Botswana's central bank, if this is true, should never have allowed that money to leave the country. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And the Botswana Central Bank and the central bank governor are not to be blamed for this.
And finally, there are perceptions coming out of those who either support or are on the side of the current president in Botswana that you got involved because of the links that still exist between the regime that your husband was part of and former President Ian Khama. What do you say to that?
Personally, I have never met President Khama until I met him in relation to this. But I think it's well known that I have very good links with South Africa, including the current president and Bridgette Radebe I know very well, as does my husband. But I have never been to Botswana, and I'm delighted now to have made President Khama's acquaintance, and I'm certainly very happy now to be associated with him. But previously, no.